الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. صاحب المعالي نائب وزير التربية والتعليم، أصحاب السعادة، أيها السادة الحضور، أيها السيدات، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. I will be speaking in English for the sake of the speakers today. I'd like to welcome all of you, the audience, males and females, and I'd like to express my gratitude to the Ministry of Education for inviting me to take part in this session. In fact, I feel privileged to be in this session for two reasons. Number one, it is the first session in the forum. Number two, I'm sitting between two great scholars who came from the United States and Australia to share with us their expertise in an important field, namely teaching and learning. Teaching, as we all know, being part of this process myself, I prepare teachers and I'm a specialist in teaching and learning and applied linguistics specifically. I believe it consists of a wide spectrum of variables or components. We have we have the curriculum, the teaching method, the learning environment, the administration, the equipment of the university, of the school, and the group of students sometimes. This sometimes make a lot of challenges. The most important of which is, as a component, is the teacher. If we have a good teacher, basically we can overcome a good number of problems. A good teacher can overcome shortcomings in the curriculum and environment and the technology. He can make up things that will help him be successful and competent in the teaching profession. However, if it takes us a few months to change the curriculum, definitely it will take us a good while to make change to the teacher himself. We are dealing with two eras of teaching and teacher role. In the past, teachers, as we all know, we viewed them as as knowledge dispensers and in what we call teacher-centered classroom. Now that has moved and shifted to student-centered classroom, where the teacher's role is basically facilitator, mediator, and helper of the student. Now, with the new advances of technology and the knowledge-based society, teachers have an even more important role, how to adapt and implement technology in their teaching. I will not speak about this very thoroughly because I have speakers who can give it their best shot, but I definitely assure everybody that the government of Saudi Arabia has taken great steps in the development of education. As we all know, that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the government of Saudi Arabia, has dedicated a third of its budget to education. And we know that in the Ministry of Education, there's a huge project that's cost the Kingdom about $2.4 billion to invest in education. That's King Abdullah's project for general education development. Now, the initiative of the Prince Faisal ibn Abdullah Al Saud, the Minister of Education, to name this year as the teacher's year, that is a confession from us in this country, and the highlight of the role of the teacher being very important. And what's even more important is how we can improve this teacher to cope with the new demands that he's faced with. Please allow me now to introduce my first speaker, and I will do that in Arabic, so sometimes it's hard to switch between Arabic and English, but my first speaker is Dr. Colin William Evers. He is a professor of English and Arabic, and he is a professor of English and Arabic, and he is a professor of English and Arabic, and he is a professor of English and Arabic, and he is a professor of English and Arabic, and he is a professor of English and Arabic, and he is a professor of English and Arabic, and he is a professor of English and Arabic, and he is a professor of English and Arabic, and he is a professor of English and Arabic, and he is a professor of English and Arabic, and he is a professor of English and Arabic, and he is a professor of English and Arabic, and he is a professor of English and Arabic, and he is a professor of English and Arabic, and he is a professor of English and Arabic, and he is a professor of English and Arabic, and he is a professor of English and Arabic, and he is a professor of English and Arabic, and he is a professor of English and Arabic, and he is a prof هو أستاذ القيادة التربوية بمدرسة التربية بجامعة نيو ساوث ويلز. ضيفنا يحمل درجتي بكالوريوس، الأولى في الآداب والثانية في الرياضيات، وحصل عليهما بمرتبة الشرف. وحصل على الدكتوراه من جامعة سيدني في تخصص تربية وفلسفة التربية عن موضوع أطروحته البناء المنطقي والتبرير في نظرية التربية. تولى العديد من المناصب الإدارية من خلال كونه أستاذا زائرا وأستاذا القيادة التربوية وأستاذ شرف في العديد من الجامعات، منها جامعة ويلز وجامعة هونغ كونغ. وتولى أيضا العديد من الأعمال كمحاضر ومعيد وأستاذ مشارك وأستاذ في كلية التربية بجامعة هونغ كونغ وجامعة موناش الإسرائيلية. متحدثنا اليوم حائز على جائزة الكومنولث في الدراسات العليا كلية التربية بجامعة سيدني، وهو عضو في العديد من اللجان. في الحقيقة قد لا يسعفني الوقت أن آتي على كل ما في السيرة الذاتية، ولكن أعرف أن السيرة الذاتية في الكتيب المؤتمر فللجميع الاطلاع عليها، ولكن سأختصر بأن أقول هو عضو في لجنة الترقيات المهنية ولجنة المراجعة من مركز البحوث والسياسة الاجتماعية، وكذلك عمل رئيسا لقسم البحوث بالعديد من الكليات، ورئيس لجنة الدرجات العليا والأخلاق والبحوث، وكذلك عضو في اللجنة الاستشارية للعمداء ولجنة العمداء المساعدين. أيضا كان عضوا في لجنة ميزانية الكلية والموارد البشرية، وعضوا لمجلس الكلية ومجلس الجامعة. له العديد من الأبحاث والدراسات في هذا التخصص، ففي الحقيقة أن سيرته زاخرة بالعديد من المعارف، وسأكتفي بما ذكرت ولأتيح له المجال للتحدث، فأرحب به باسمكم جميعا. So please, Dr. Evers, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for your very kind invitation to come and speak to your conference. It's both a pleasure and an honour to do so. Because my Australian accent may be more difficult to follow than the printed text, I'm going to follow fairly closely to my script. I'm going to begin by saying some theoretical things about difficulties in prediction, and then I'm going to say some practical things about what this means for teacher professional development. And finally, at the end, I'll say just a little bit about technology, but I leave it to speakers more expert than me to talk about the details of technology. My topic is teacher professional development as critical self-learning. Can someone show me how to change to the next slide? What do teachers need to know in a knowledge society? That's our question. Nearly 40 years ago, the Berkeley sociologist Daniel Bell wrote an enormously influential book, The Coming of Post-Industrial Society, A Venture in Social Forecasting. And for Bell, a post-industrial society, which we would now call a knowledge-based society, is one where more than 50% of the workforce is employed in knowledge industries. With the benefit of hindsight, one important lesson to be learned from the book is the difficulty of social forecasting. And Bell made two key errors. He did predict the expansion of the services sector. He did correctly predict the expansion of the services sector, but there was no predicted major restructuring of society based on the rise of technological elites. And also, the book assumed an ongoing dispute between capitalism and communism. Why is social prediction so difficult, especially when it comes to the effects of technology? And what does this difficulty mean for teachers? There are many arguments showing the limits of social prediction, but I'm going to mention two and dwell at length on one. The first is an argument by Karl Popper. Popper was a very influential philosopher of science who had great influence over especially scientific researchers. He wrote a book called The Poverty of Historicism, and I'm quoting from the preface. This is his argument for the difficulty of prediction. The course of human history is strongly influenced by the growth of human knowledge. We cannot predict by rational or scientific methods the future growth of our scientific knowledge. We cannot, therefore, predict the future course of human history. The key premise is premise two, namely that we cannot predict the future growth of knowledge. His argument for this, published elsewhere, is highly technical and draws on a 1930 result in mathematics known as Gödel's incompleteness theorem, which shows roughly that there can be some true claims in mathematics that can't be proved. Popper then adapts this result to prediction. A society of predictors with complete knowledge of the present cannot predict all of its future states. There are some surprises out there that we cannot in principle know. There is thus a fundamental theoretical limit to what social theory can tell us. Indeed, Popper adds, all our knowledge is fallible and limited. How can we develop scientific and social knowledge? Popper has an answer to this by making bold conjectures and testing them. And later he developed this into a formula for scientific inquiry. How does scientific knowledge grow? He said by formulating a problem, which I've called P1, then formulating a tentative theory, TT1, to solve it, then testing that theory in an attempt to eliminate errors, that's called EE1, and then seeing if that either solves the problem or leads to another problem, P2. Popper thought that the growth of scientific knowledge followed a series of cycles that repeated and repeated until the problem was solved. These I've called Popper cycles. I'm going to come back to Popper's ideas and their relevance for teachers a bit later. The other argument for difficulty in social prediction concerns complexity. But since we all know about the problems of complexity, I'll pass over this. So how can teachers develop and improve their knowledge of practice, given that the main theories in pedagogy and social science are both fallible and context-dependent? There are two broad strategies that people use. The first one is learn about particular examples of good practice in particular contexts and adapt that knowledge. The second is learn more general claims about good practice and apply that knowledge. Here's some examples of each, and also some criticisms. Concerning particular examples, learn from case studies of expert teachers, how they handle matters in their particular contexts. The problem with this is that you've got to need to know what's in the mind of the expert teacher, their theory of practice. And you've got to need to know similarities and differences between expert teachers' context and the context of application. That requires a lot of theorising by teachers and can be quite a difficult task. Here's an extreme example of the difficulty of interpreting expertise for application across contexts that differ radically in time, culture and technology. Which statement is most likely to be true? If Caesar commanded US forces in the Korean War, he would have used catapults. If Caesar commanded US forces in the Korean War, he would have used the atom bomb. Quite a bit of interpretation has to go into reading his mind and updating it to current circumstances. Another case of particularity is to do case studies of best schools. What can we learn? This is a very big industry and there's a research bias here. Many researchers study good schools, very few study failing schools. However, the statistical and causal structure of good schools is in many ways different from failing schools, so the context for adapting the knowledge is different. You don't really want to start from the good schools, you want to start from those that are having trouble. Here is a generality example for teacher education. There are large-scale statistical studies of teaching as a guide to good practice. Many of these have recently been collated and analysed in John Hattie's book, Visible Learning. Here's what Hattie did. He analysed 800 meta-analyses that summarised 50,000 research studies involving outcomes for 200 million students. That's an awful lot of data. Hattie's aim is to calculate the effect size for a comprehensive range of educational practices that are thought to promote student learning. Here's some examples where an effect size, where the definition of an effect size is the number of standard deviations an effect group is above a control group. Hattie found Piagetian programs had quite a large effect size, 1.28 standard deviations. Micro-teaching also had a large effect size, and so did teacher feedback. These findings on effect sizes are a useful place to start in thinking about teaching practices that improve student learning. But having worked for a long time in Hong Kong, I note some problems. A very large number of the studies were conducted under particular social and cultural conditions, for example, those that obtained in North America. But cultural conditions affect learning. A good example of this can be found in international comparative studies, such as the trends in international mathematics and science study, where Asian students perform particularly well. The range of teaching and learning practices is constrained in different ways by different cultural traditions, histories, and social mores. For example, teaching and learning in Confucian heritage cultures is different to Western traditions. Borrowing models of teaching, learning, curriculum, school administration and leadership from other jurisdictions can be a useful starting point, but application must be constrained for appropriateness. For example, Western models of school leadership did not transfer well for Hong Kong with their cultural emphasis on harmony. Okay, here's a summary of the problems that need to be overcome. Our best social science knowledge is fallible and sensitive to context for its usefulness. The best research evidence on teaching and learning, whether from particular studies or from large-scale studies, needs to be carefully interpreted and tested for appropriateness in adaptation and application. So how do we build good theories for teachers? In starting with fallible theories, the emphasis shifts from content to epistemically progressive processes that improve knowledge. And I'm going to introduce you to some research that I've been doing over the years with a Canadian scholar. About 10 years ago, a Canadian researcher, Stephanie Chitpin, was studying how 6 teachers with various backgrounds and training used portfolios to improve their professional knowledge. And there was a big tradition for that, especially in the reflective practitioner tradition. With the reflective practitioner model, which was originally developed by Donald Shon, keeping a diary was a central tool for aiding reflection. However, when Chitpin and I carefully analysed the teacher portfolios and interview material in Chitpin's study, the data fitted a well-structured, epistemically progressive process, Popper cycles. And we've published part of this research. This is a commercial for that paper, which is in the journal Teachers and Teaching Theory and Practice. What we found was that the teachers were formulating quite clearly an initial problem. Then they were trying to propose hypotheses to solve it, their tentative theory. How's that? Then they were testing their tentative theory in their teaching practice, and they were either solving the problem or repeating the cycle. Those examples are published in the paper that I mentioned earlier, but here's an example from my own research in Hong Kong. I mention this one because it's published and you can look it up in print. A new teacher in a Hong Kong secondary school undergoing further training attempts to deal with a quite specific classroom management problem. Students falling asleep in his English classes. It's a very specific problem, P1. He begins with a tentative theory that he thinks will work, and then he implements it and sees the result. But the result's not very satisfactory. He needs to refine both the problem and his tentative theory. Okay, I don't know whether you can see that, but here's how he developed his own professional knowledge through knowledge building. His first problem was, how can I stop Form 4 students sleeping in my English class? And his tentative theory was, this is achieved by waking up the students and giving punishment to them. But when he does this, he finds that there are too many interruptions in the class and the class atmosphere becomes tense. So he reformulates the problem, how to stop students sleeping in class and maintain a warm classroom atmosphere. And his second theory is, this is achieved by giving more written tasks to keep students busy and awake. So he tries it out. And what happens is the situation is improved in the sense that fewer students fall asleep, but students still are not learning as they just do the worksheets in a mechanical way. So this brings him to a further problem, how to motivate students to learn English. And he suggests this is achieved by using games and activities in class. Now, if you know anything about Hong Kong schools, they're very crowded. The students enjoy the games but create noise and disturb other classes in the crowded school setting. So this brings him to his fourth problem, how to motivate students to learn English in the local school setting. And he theorises this is achieved by replacing some coursebook materials with more authentic materials. So he tries it out. The students are more active in class discussion but rely on their first language, which is Chinese, as translation is frequently asked for with authentic materials, which are more difficult. So this brings him to his fifth problem, how to make the materials easier for students. This is achieved by adaptation and design of guiding activities for the authentic materials. So he does it. The adapted materials are well received by students and students rely less on their first language, but it all takes a huge amount of time. How to find time to adapt more authentic materials is his last problem. And he says, I can't do this, this is out of my control. I have to seek support from the principal. Well, he gets the support and it has a happy ending. The materials for the students using materials enjoy a higher passing rate in the examination and it's a big success. This is a good example of critical self-learning. It's critical because he's looking for evidence to test his theory and to refute it if it does not solve the problem. It's self-learning because he's the one in charge of his professional learning. He's the experimenter on his own practice. It's a good example because it's epistemically progressive. It leads to improved knowledge of practice. He eventually solves the problems. Here's another example which is a bit more complicated. It's a leadership team of senior teachers, including the principal, who have to deal with the problem of boosting first-year secondary enrolments in order to prevent their school from being closed down. This is an existential threat. They need to meet first-year quota. So their problem is very clear, exceed a threshold intake on their quota. Their tentative theory involves starting with something easy to implement, and then they can test it, they can get evidence for it very easily by counting potential students. I won't go through all the details of this, but it was quite a long process. Their problem was how to recruit enough students for the school to continue to exist, and their first suggestion was to to mount a program of publicity and promotion of the school in the local area. And when they did that, they found that the school had a bad reputation. So it didn't work. So what they then had to do in their second problem was how to change parents' perceptions of the school. They set about inviting parents in. They set about talking about new ways of doing things in the school. But it still wasn't sufficient to bring in more students. So then their third problem, P3, how to attract students from further afield. Well, they decided they needed to have transport for this, subsidised transport. So they had to raise funds. That was the problem that this... So how to raise funds to subsidise school transport? Their tentative theory 4 was to invite the alumni to support it. But the extra students were not enough. So their fifth problem, how to enhance the school's attractiveness, and they hit upon the idea of providing a free lunch for everyone, again asking the alumni. Again, it was insufficient to meet quota. So back to their original problem, P6, how to further expand the size of the Form 1 intake. Here they did something really big. They made the school co-educational. Instead of being a boys-only school, it became for boys and girls. This provided a major boost in intake, but they still had a lot of problems to solve about changing the facilities. So their seventh problem was how to convert the school. They managed to do this. They set up a task force. They got money from the government and the alumni, and they made target. So their last problem was how to make sure that they don't get into that difficulty again, and they set up a quality assurance program and an outreach program to make sure that the school remained viable and effective. Now, this is a method not of decision making, but of a trajectory of problems and solutions. This is how the decision-making body learned over time to improve their knowledge of what would work. It's a good example because, well, it had a happy ending, but I want to note some issues here. There was no one decision that solves the problem. Instead, we have a problem-solutions trajectory. Also, their trajectory was specific to their school. Other schools with the same problem would most likely have different trajectories.
Professor Evers, excuse me.
Social science is not strong enough to guide them to their tentative theory 6, going co-educational, straight away. Since every theory could be wrong, it is best to start with the easiest, least costly, and work up. In the end, they decided to put in place a procedure for ensuring that they could deal with the problem should it threaten to occur again. Here's some general lessons for knowledge building, for teachers building good theories. Try to formulate well-structured problems with clear criteria for success. In developing tentative theories, start with the best knowledge available, but remember that it may not be suitable for your classroom, your school, your region, your system. Context matters greatly. One size does not fit all. This methodology requires you to build your own theories. Testing your theories requires that you submit to the evidence. Avoid confirmation bias. That means avoid the practice of interpreting all evidence as supporting your theory. Develop the habit of being critical of your own ideas, as well as the ideas of others. Note that in professional practice, teachers can have several sequences of popper cycles going at once. Don't let the solution to one set of problems be the cause of many others. Seek overall coherence of your professional practice. I want to conclude with a brief note on technology and teaching that draws on some research that I've done more recently. In some research, one of my PhD students, now Dr. Kakila Kachal, did in Hong Kong, we looked at the influence of the internet on teacher roles among teachers of middle high school students. And here's what we noted. We noted a rise in autonomous student learning. That was autonomous student learning of school learning. We also noted teachers were increasingly being asked about the relevance and use of school learning, and that teachers were advising on a lot of issues to do with student socialisation. The last thing we noted is with so much information available on the internet, teachers were less involved in transmission of knowledge and much, much more engaged in critical evaluation of knowledge. Here's an advertisement. The findings and theory will be out in this book by Dr. Kachal and myself next year, called Teacher Leadership in the Age of the Internet, New Conceptions of Student Learning.
Excuse me, sir. Professor Evers.
As will be evident from my line of argument, I want to conclude by observing that the very strong emphasis on critical thinking in schools and universities being promoted by the government of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is of fundamental importance, not just for teachers and students, but for all citizens in a knowledge society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Evers, for this informative lecture. And just to save time, I will just go ahead and read Dr. Donald Knezek. He is the... I'll start speaking Arabic again. دكتور دونالد كنيزك رئيس منظمة الجمعية العالمية للتقنية والتعليم بالولايات المتحدة الأمريكية، حاز على درجة البكالوريوس في الرياضيات بتقدير ممتاز من كلية دارتماوث في عام 1971، وماجستير في الرياضيات كذلك من جامعة هاواي في عام 73، ودكتوراه في الإدارة التربوية من جامعة تكساس. عمل قائداً ومديراً تنفيذياً أول في الجمعية العلمية للتقنية في التربية من عام 2002 إلى تاريخه، ثم وقبل ذلك أسس العديد من الجمعيات ومنها مقر الجمعية العالمية للتقنية في التربية في واشنطن من أجل تعزيز جهود الدفاع وتأثير السياسة والقيادة الفكرية والعلاقات العامة والروابط مع الوكالات والجمعيات والمؤسسات الأخرى. عمل مديراً لمركز الجمعية العالمية للتقنية في التربية لإعداد معلمي الغد لاستخدام التقنية، وذلك من عام 99 إلى عام 2005. له العديد من الأبحاث والكتب المنشورة والخبرة الإدارية الواسعة. سأكتفي بما ذكرت. Would like to welcome Dr. Knezek, I pronounced that correctly, Knezek to present his presentation entitled The Emerging Poles of Teachers in the Digital Age. So please, you have the remaining time, and we are sorry that we will not have comments and a discussion after his presentation.
Good morning, and I'm extremely honored to be here. I want to say first that I'm going to say less than I had intended to, but I will be here for the entire conference, and I will also be in a booth in the exhibition. So if you hear something of interest, please visit me during the week and we can talk more about that. So I want to talk a little about the challenges we talked about for teachers and some examples of what we're finding among teachers who still do their job very well, even in a technology-rich and information-rich environment. So I want to talk some about, I want to talk first about an assumption, and I'm assuming that we understand that teachers have a challenge we've never had before, and that is to prepare a digital generation of learners for their future. So it is different from the very beginning in how students learn and what opportunities they have to learn. That challenges our teachers. Okay, so where do I need to aim this thing? It's technology, you know. Okay, so can I get some help from up there? It looks like this is not going to move the... the slides. Okay. So what is important, we have a person that we honor in the Western world, Charles Darwin, and while we think he knows a lot about science, we know he knows a lot about institutions. And the institution of education, it's not the strongest, it's not even the smartest, but it's that system that's able to adapt to change. And believe me, we're in the middle of that adaptation. So what the International Society for Technology in Education tries to do is help people prepare for that adaptation, to make them more able to adapt to a changing world. Okay. And so what I want to talk a little about, there's a lot of innovation. There's innovation in how long is the school year, how many students are in one class, what kind of data systems you have for education. But that's all innovation around the edges. I want to talk about innovation at the heart of learning. So the true student learning experience and what we're seeing change at the heart of learning. Oh, this could be fun. So as I think about innovation at the heart of learning, so I'm talking about students using their tools that they use to communicate in society, but using those in school and out of school for learning. We're talking about seeing students, especially secondary and university students, working like professionals work in the real world. We're looking at them learning in teams, that they use games, they use simulations, they use competitions. I think I can hold it longer. We're talking about having students address complex, authentic problems and projects, not simple one-click examples out of the textbooks. And we're talking about a culture of co-learning, that students learn from each other, that teachers learn from each other, that school leaders learn from each other, and that teachers learn from students. And that's a very different model for teachers to learn to use, and that they bring personal relevance to students. We were talking about asking questions about what difference it makes. Why is school learning important? Those things are the issues that teachers have to deal with every day. And when we begin to change that student learning experience, it's these things that we see happening. Now we're working. And also learning, teaching, and assessment as social activities. We put students in groups to learn, and then we take them out to do the assessment and do single item tests with individuals. So our organization has a set of skills that are important for students. And the first thing teachers must know is what they're delivering to students. What is it they want students to do? How should they perform? And then they know what to teach. So the skills are very different from traditional. Creativity and innovation, communication and collaboration, research and information fluency, critical thinking, problem solving, and decision making, digital citizenship, and technology operations and concepts. Those are the skills teachers have to impart to students, so teachers must have those skills themselves. When we look at curriculum for the digital age, there are 5 primary principles that I think are important. First, it's got to be relevant to students. Secondly, engaging. They can't have students falling asleep in English class. It's got to be world class. And what that means is that if a student masters that curriculum, then they perform well locally, they perform well regionally, but they also perform well on the world scene, on the global scene. And that doesn't only mean academics, and it doesn't only mean operating technology, but it means how they interact with social issues, and it means how they interact with their fellow human beings. So all those are important in the new curriculum. All right, it times out. That's what the problem is. Whoop. The curriculum must be culturally appropriate so that we aren't encouraging students to do inappropriate things, and it must be accessible. And when I say accessible, not only do we have bandwidth to the school, but we have a background in those students' knowledge and skills so they can actually participate. So to start an advanced placement physics class when students don't have basic science knowledge is not making that accessible. So you must have the background so students can succeed, and that's making it accessible. So we have a whole new set of literacies. We have new skills for living and learning. The disciplines themselves are different because technology makes professionals work very differently than they've worked in the past. And I mentioned again the accessibility issue, that if you don't have the background built for students, you're not really making things accessible by giving them a challenging curriculum. So you can see that teachers have a significant challenge. We're expecting much from teachers. Here's what we find, that teachers who do well, they don't any longer teach in an isolated classroom. They now have networks of teachers that they interact with. Not every teacher is a data analyst, but they may have a friend who can help them with the data. So we see teachers teaching socially. New teachers understand that they have to motivate and inspire students. It's not just dumping knowledge, but it's inspiring students to grab that knowledge, to grasp that knowledge. New teachers are digital learners and digital workers themselves. So students see the teacher modeling 21st century skills. They look like a 21st century professional. That's what successful teachers today look like. Their successful teachers are co-learners. I mentioned this earlier. They learn with their students, they learn with their colleagues. And teachers in the digital age continue to grow professionally. We talked about professional development in the other session. So if you see a successful teacher, you see one who grows and who has a responsibility to continue to learn. And they also lead. So school leaders, school principals, heads of school, tell me that the new teachers that are successful teachers come to their office and say, our school needs this, or our department needs this. But not only do they demand it, they're willing to work on a committee or work on a task force or work on a team to cause things to get better. So we see teachers who are successful in the digital age expressing these behaviors, and ones who are not so successful in the digital age, we find these absent in their behaviors. So 2 quick examples, and then I'm done. I hope the second one works. It's a video, but the first one is we have a very young teacher who was placed as a permanent substitute when a teacher had to be out for maternity leave, and she taught literature to 16 and 17-year-olds. She decided to start half of her discussions online on a wiki instead of in the classroom. She did a little of her own research, and she found that the leaders for the discussions that were started online were a completely different set from the people who were leaders of the discussion when it was started face-to-face. So she says by doing both, she engages many more kids, many more students in the discussion and in discussion leadership. And she had evidence for that. So that's one example of how a teacher uses technology to reach more of her students. The next one I'm going to try is a video, and then I'm done. So we'll see if we can make this one work. Whoop.
Hi, I'm Devin.
And I'm Ashley.
And I'm Dylan.
And I'm Amber.
And I'm Kara. Today we're going to teach you about the Bernoulli principle.
And all we're gonna use is a piece of thread,
2 ping pong balls,
tape and scissors,
and a puff of air.
First, cut 2 pieces of thread 4 feet long each.
Next, attach the ping pong balls to the thread with your tape. Then, tape the other end of the thread to the ceiling so that the balls end up to be about 1 inch apart.
What do you think will happen when you blow between the balls?
They'll fly apart, of course.
No, they're going to click together.
Well, why don't we just find out?
Can I see that one more time?
I told you so. But what happened?
When you blow between the ping pong balls, the rapid flow of air reduces the pressure between the balls. This creates greater air pressure outside the balls, which forces them together.
See, I told you. Why don't you try it? Okay, I will.
Here's some more examples of the Bernoulli principle.
The flames spin in because of reduced air pressure, and the wing lifts because of the same reason.
So the Bernoulli principle explains why aircraft of any sort can fly. And that is the Bernoulli principle.
So the first thing people say when they look at that video is they say, I didn't see any technology. But until you understand that the assignment by this new age teacher was find a concept about science that's not in your textbook. Go online and research that concept until you understand it deeply. Build a multimedia presentation that will teach it to your classmates and present that presentation. Then you begin to understand what we're talking about with teachers using technology. So they used a video camera, they used online information, and so they used education technology to teach that lesson. And I think there were maybe 3 females in that group. We have trouble keeping females in science in the US, but I bet those 3 are more interested in science than they would have ever been without that assignment. So there are creative ways to engage students and to ensure that they complete their education and that they do it in creative ways. And I'll just say, shame on us if we fail to take advantage of that to change the student learning experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Knezik, for this beautiful presentation about the challenges in the digital age. أنوه أخوان أنه المحاضرة الثانية ستستمر الآن فآمل عدم الخروج. On your behalf, I would like to thank the 2 speakers for what they have presented, and they will be presenting again tomorrow from 9:15 to 10 approximately, if you could check the timetable. I was really honored to chair this session, and thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.